Hello everyone and welcome to another video. I hope that you are very well. If you're very observant, you will notice I am wearing the exact same clothes and holding the exact same mug with the exact same coffee from my last video because I am batch filming. And today, somehow it is December and I am bringing you my November wrap up. And so November, I read a lot of books in November, most of them very short books. If you saw my Inkling reading vlog, you can go watch that. That's got more in-depth summaries of a lot of the books I'm going to talk about today. And it was a pretty good reading month. It was a very 4-star month. A lot of 4-star books in November. A couple of really standout 5 stars. One 3-star, but pretty solid 4-star month. As always, I'm going to be ranking the books that I read in November. We'll start with my least favourite and work our way up to my favourite. So without any further ado, let's get to the books. So my least favourite book, which I gave 3 stars to, so it's still a pretty enjoyable read, is A Nobleman's Guide to Seducing a Scoundrel by K.J. Charles? Why couldn't I say that? K.J. Charles. I have never read any K.J. Charles before, and you know what? I did really enjoy it. I enjoyed the romance very much. The romance was great. The rest of the plot, could have done without. It was a Regency romance and there's a quabble about inheritance, which, first of all, if you're quabbling about inheritance, I think you might be too closely related to be the two main characters in a romance book. I could not keep track of this family tree, so I just decided to assume for plot reasons that they are in no way related. Yeah, because I could not keep track of how everyone was related. Yeah, it was this whole squabble about inheritance and just there's so many little fights and backstabbing and everything going on. But I did really enjoy the romance. The romance itself was lovely and was great and, you know, was very gripping and I felt very invested. So there we go. There's my 3-star read for the month. I now have 6 4-star books to talk to you about, so we're going to go straight through them. And first of all, where in my pile is it? Doctor Who is back! So I read We're Falling Through Space by J. David Reid. This is about how mundane everyday life experiences are depicted in Doctor Who, which is such a great idea for a book because that's my favourite bit about Doctor Who is when mundane everyday things are in it. I love that about sci-fi generally. And it was just a really nice, fun read and a nice look at all of New Who. And yeah, especially watching the most recent episodes. So at the time of filming, 2 of the specials have aired. Then kind of going into them, thinking about some of the things in this book was really fun. So yes, a must read for Doctor Who fans. It was so great. And the chapters were called Time and Relative Dimensions in Space. So what more could you want? So moving up through the 4 stars, my next book was my Buzzword Reading Challenge pick. So the buzzword for November was good, and I did not have a single book on my TBR that had the word good or a permutation of good in it. Not a single one. But then I remembered the Berlin Novels has 2 books in it, one of which is Mr. Norris Changes Trains, the other of which is Goodbye to Berlin. So I read this one for my Buzzword Reading Challenge and it's been on my TBR for a really long time. I love A Single Man by Christopher Isherwood. It's one of my favourite books of all time. The only other Isherwood prior to this I'd tried to read is Christopher and His Kind and I hated it and I DNF'd it. So it was a lottery. It was a bit of a lottery going into this, but I did really enjoy it. It was the inspiration for the musical Cabaret, so it was nice to see those characters in this book. And what I really appreciated about this book, what really struck me, and this is something, you know, I will never know what it's like to read this as a contemporary reader. This book is drawn from personal experiences, written in Germany in the final few years before the Second World War, and, you know, Berlin over that sort of decade running up to World War II was a wildly changing place with lots of different cultural ideas. It started off as a very incredibly progressive place, which obviously was not the case for long. And so you've got all these different ideas and people and politics all clashing at the same time. And this book was published before the Second World War. All the stories in it were published before the Second World War. And so you cannot read it without the knowledge of what was to come. I always say there are some books that I enjoy as historical documents. When it comes to classics, there are some books that I enjoy for what they represent of that moment in time, and this is one of them, that I got a glimpse of what it would have been like to be a very oblivious, lost in your own world, bohemian writer in 1930s Berlin, with all of this going on around you and starting to realise we have to get out of here. So, yeah, I think I enjoyed it more for the glimpse into the past it gave me, rather than the book itself, but I did enjoy the book itself as well. Next up, another inkling, The Loki Variations by Carl Johnson. And this is about how the figure of Loki in mythology has changed throughout history, how Loki has become a sort of character for us to project modern ideas onto, and how that has changed over especially the past century, and all through the lens of the author looking for like his own Loki, how he thinks of Loki in his head. And it's just a really fun exploration of the character and looking at the character through the changing social lens of not just the 20th and 21st century, but of the Scandinavian folklore and how that's changed. So yes, very interesting little read, this one. So I set myself a challenge this year. Every month I would read at least one book from a different country. And this month I read November by Jorge Galan. I really hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it's no surprise as to why I saved this one for now. This was not what I expected at all. It's set in El Salvador, that's where the author is from, and it's about real people and real events that happened in the 1980s in El Salvador when there was civil unrest and war happening. And the author spoke to the real people who are in this book. It's a lot of their words and their lives and their stories. And each section of the book is told in a different style. So some of it is interview style, some of it's first person, some of it's third person, which worked and also was quite jarring sometimes. But I think overall was good. Overall was really, really good. And it was just a very sort of moving and absorbing, beautifully written book. And yeah, unlike anything I've read for a long, long time. Another inkling, Machine Readable Me by Zara Rahman. And this one is about how AI and technology and biometrics are used by governments, mostly, but also companies, and how they inform our own sense of identity. So, for example, from a really basic perspective, a passport. How passports divide us and some are quote unquote stronger than others. Talking about how biometrics are used, how they discriminate without even thinking about how they discriminate. So, for example, people who work in manual labour, their fingerprints will wear down and change over time. So things like that I'd never really thought about before. It's a really good introduction to the topic. So yeah, very much enjoyed this one as well. Even if it did scare me a bit. And then my top 4-star book, this was kind of on the cusp of 4 to 5, is Can't I Go Instead by Lee Geum-yi. And this is set in Korea during the Second World War and the Korean War, and follows 2 women. One is the daughter of a nobleman and the other is her indentured servant. And it follows their lives through Korea, Japan. They get separated, and the horrendous hardships that they go through, and how their lives, even from across the world, their lives are still affecting each other. It was beautifully written, really, really beautifully written. A very slow read. It kind of, demanded that you took your time with it, but it was worth it. It was really, really great. We're officially in the 5-star zone. So, first of all, BFFs by Anahit Baruz. This is another inkling, as you can tell. And this is about, the tagline is The Radical Potential of Female Friendship. Not tagline, subtitle. And it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's about friendships, specifically female friendships, how and why they are as strong as they are, and how and why they are not treated the same as romantic relationships when they very much should be. It's a great little deep dive into the topic. Really, really recommend. It was just great. It was great. Next up, we have another historical fiction, and that is Jidi Vardy by Ruth Estevez. Now, I read the first 10,000 words of this as a judge for the Book Bloggers Novel of the Year Awards, or as my head reads it when I see it written out, Babunya. And it did not make it through to the finals, but there was a book tour, so I jumped at the chance to read the whole thing. And it's set in the 18th century in North Yorkshire, in Whitby. And the main character, Jidi, she is born to a noblewoman on a ship and abandoned as a baby, rescued by pirates, and brought up by this town. And the first book follows her finding out about her history and about the history of the people in the town and her ancestry, her family. It was such a gripping read. And I love the sort of book where, like, the sea is basically a character, you know, that it's so about being by the ocean and by the sea, and I just loved it so much. There are 2 more books, and I'm very keen to see what happens next to Jidi. And finally, the best book that I read in November is another inkling. It is Whatever Next by Josephine J, Adeline Barra and Hannah Fabian Smith. This is about adult adoptee identities, and this is something I have been fascinated by for a while, and something that never really gets discussed. Usually when adoption is discussed, it's from the perspective of a parent, and very rarely from the perspective of the children who were adopted. And all 3 of the authors, so they each wrote a chapter for this book, and they were all adopted from China in the 1990s, and they each tackle a different stereotype about adoption. It was really moving and powerful, and I think the first step in opening up that dialogue about adoption to making it about everyone involved and not just the parents who are doing the adopting. Yeah, it was a really, really excellent read. Can't recommend it highly enough. So there we have it. There are my November books. Let me know in the comments what you read in November. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos from me. Have a lovely day, a lovely week, and I will see you next time. Ta-ra for now.